Chapter 1. The First Note in the Snow. The town of Winter's Hollow was always breathtaking this time of year. Snow blanketed the cobblestone streets in pristine white, and the glow of golden fairy lights twinkled against the frosted glass of shop windows. Towering evergreens, dusted with fresh snow, lined the square, each one adorned with delicate ornaments and ribbons of deep crimson. The scent of roasted chestnuts and spiced cider drifted through the crisp evening air, mingling with the soft hum of Christmas carols that played from an old record store at the corner of the market. But for Alara Sinclair, the magic of Christmas had lost its warmth. She pulled her coat tighter around her as she walked through the town square, her boots crunching against the freshly fallen snow. Every festive decoration, every flickering candle in a window, reminded her of what she had lost. Her grandmother, the woman who had filled her childhood with music and laughter, was gone. This was the first Christmas without her, and the once joyful traditions now felt hollow. Alara had grown up with her grandmother's stories of Winter's Hollow's cherished customs, where every house was filled with music and carols were sung by candlelight on Christmas Eve. But now, even the melodies felt muted, their meaning lost to the void of grief. As she reached the town's central fountain, now frozen solid into a crystalline sculpture, she hesitated. Her fingers curled around the small sheet of paper tucked inside her pocket. It was the first carol she had written since her grandmother's passing, a song of longing and memory, one she could never bring herself to sing aloud. Instead, she knelt down and carefully placed the folded note atop the snow-covered bench near the fountain. The ink was still smudged in places from where her tears had fallen as she wrote it, but it didn't matter. This wasn't for her. It was a gift to the town, to the season, to the memory of what Christmas used to mean. Maybe someone would find it. Maybe no one would. But for now, it was enough to leave a piece of her heart behind. She took a deep breath, standing up and brushing the cold from her gloves. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the distant sound of laughter and holiday cheer. Without another glance, she turned and disappeared into the night, leaving behind only the note and the quiet ache of remembrance. Unbeknownst to her, she wasn't the only one lingering in the town square that evening. From the shadow of a nearby shop awning, Liam Calloway watched as the mysterious young woman placed something on the bench and walked away. He had only arrived in Winter's Hollow that morning, retreating from the bustling city in search of solitude. A renowned musician by trade, Liam had spent years composing for others, grand symphonies, love ballads, melodies that touched hearts across the world. And yet, for all the songs he had written, he had forgotten how to hear music for himself. Curious, he waited until she had disappeared into the snowy streets before stepping forward. His fingers were numb as he reached for the folded paper, unfolding it carefully. The moment his eyes scanned the handwritten lyrics, something stirred in him. The words were raw, filled with grief and longing, yet beautifully composed. The melody practically wrote itself in his mind, as though the song had been waiting for him to find it. He exhaled, his breath curling into the cold air. Who had left this? And why? Liam's gaze lifted toward the path the woman had taken, but she was already gone. A ghost in the snow, leaving behind only her words. A flicker of something unfamiliar stirred in his chest, an ember of inspiration he thought had long been extinguished. Tucking the note into his coat, he made a silent decision. Tomorrow night, he would leave a response. Chapter 2. Echoes of a Distant Melody. Liam Calloway sat by the fireplace in the small cottage he had rented on the outskirts of Winter's Hollow. The flames flickered and cast warm shadows across the rustic walls, but he barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, fixed on the delicate folds of paper resting on the table before him. The note he had found in the snow. The words had lingered with him all evening, weaving their way into his thoughts like a forgotten melody waiting to be played. There was something undeniably raw in the lyrics, an ache that resonated with his own wounds. It had been a long time since he had felt this kind of inspiration, the kind that didn't come from deadlines or commissions, but from something deeper, something real. He reached for his guitar, fingers brushing against the strings as he played a tentative chord. A hum of sound filled the room, tentative yet growing with certainty. He closed his eyes and let the lyrics from the note guide him, shaping the music into something new, something intimate. The song wasn't his, not entirely, but in this moment, it felt like it belonged to both of them, the unknown writer and himself. A sharp knock at the door broke his concentration. He sighed, setting his guitar aside and crossing the room. As he pulled the door open, a gust of cold air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of pine and the faint sounds of Christmas festivities in the town square. Standing before him was the innkeeper, Mrs. Whitmore, bundled in a thick wool coat, her cheeks rosy from the cold. "Evening, Mr. Calloway," she said with a kind smile. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Liam replied, stepping back to let her in. She hesitated on the threshold, glancing at the fireplace. "I just wanted to check in, see how you were settling. The cottage can be a bit lonely this time of year." Liam nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "I appreciate it. It's peaceful." Mrs. Whitmore's gaze fell to the paper on the table. "Ah, I see you found one of the town's little mysteries." His brow furrowed. "Mysteries?" She chuckled, stepping closer and lifting the note between her gloved fingers. "These have been appearing around Winter's Hollow for years, but this season seems special, more heartfelt, more personal." She looked at him knowingly. "Whoever's writing them, they're reaching people." Liam exhaled slowly. "Do you know who's behind them?" Mrs. Whitmore shook her head. "No one does. But perhaps that's part of the magic." After she left, Liam sat back down, his fingers absent-mindedly strumming the guitar again. He thought about what Mrs. Whitmore had said. These notes weren't just lyrics. They were messages, carrying something unspoken between their lines. And now, he was a part of it. His fingers found the pen resting on the table. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, with slow determination, he began to write. A response, a verse to match the song he had found. He wasn't sure what would come of it, but he knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow night, he would leave his reply. Chapter 3. Whispers Between the Staves. The town of Winter's Hollow awoke beneath a sky streaked with dawn's pale gold and silver hues, a quiet serenity blanketing the streets as fresh snow settled atop the rooftops. Alara Sinclair stood by the window of her small bookshop, her breath fogging against the chilled glass. She had spent another restless night thinking about the note she had left behind, wondering if someone had found it, if anyone had read the lyrics poured from her aching heart. She turned away from the window, wrapping her fingers around the steaming cup of tea she had brewed, hoping its warmth might soothe the lingering ache within her. Her grandmother had always said that music had a way of finding those who needed it most. Perhaps, just perhaps, someone had needed to find her song. Deciding that lingering in thought would do no good, Alara pulled on her coat and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The town square, usually bustling with holiday cheer by mid-morning, was still waking up. Vendors arranged their festive goods, shopkeepers lit lanterns above their doors, and the scent of fresh bread and pine needles curled through the air. As she walked toward the central fountain, her heart stuttered in her chest. There, nestled upon the same bench where she had left her note, was a folded piece of parchment. A response. Her gloved fingers trembled slightly as she reached for it, hesitating for just a moment before unfolding it. The words before her were handwritten, elegant yet unpracticed, as if the writer had hesitated between lines. It wasn't merely a message. It was a song, a melody that curled into her mind as she read. Through winter's hush, A voice still sings a melody that sorrow brings, but in the frost, where echoes play, a heart may find its lost refrain. Alara exhaled sharply, emotions surging through her like a tide she hadn't braced for. Someone had found her carol, and they had answered with music of their own. She glanced around, half expecting to see someone watching, but the square remained as peaceful as before. Whoever had responded had already vanished, leaving behind only these words, a whisper between the staves, a harmony woven between strangers. Clutching the note to her chest, Alara turned and walked back to her shop, her pulse quickening with every step. Whoever had written this knew the language of loss. They understood what it meant to grieve, to yearn for something just out of reach. A thought stirred in her mind, something both thrilling and terrifying. What if she wrote back? By the time the sun had reached its peak, Alara had found herself seated at her desk, parchment laid out before her, ink staining her fingertips. Her heart pounded as she penned the next verse, letting the music guide her words as it always had. Who hears the song of winter's sigh when stars are veiled in frozen sky? If echoes call, then I shall stay to answer light in shadow's way. Folding the note carefully, Alara pulled on her coat once more, bracing against the cold. She would place her response beneath the great oak in the town square that evening. And then she would wait. Chapter 4. A song only the heart knows. The evening air wrapped around Winter's Hollow like a heavy woolen cloak, thick with the scent of pine and the quiet hum of snow drifting from the heavens. The town square, now glowing with golden lanterns and twinkling fairy lights, seemed almost otherworldly in its charm. And yet, Liam hardly noticed the beauty surrounding him. His focus was solely on the old oak tree standing at the heart of the square. His breath misted in the cold as he approached, his pulse thrumming with anticipation. He had left his reply at dawn, unsure if his words would reach the unknown composer who had stirred something long dormant within him. Now, beneath the sprawling branches dusted with fresh snow, he found his answer. A folded note, placed with deliberate care. Liam hesitated before picking it up, as though touching it might make the spell break, revealing this strange, magical exchange to be nothing more than coincidence. But as his fingers brushed against the parchment, a shiver raced down his spine. Unfolding it, he read the new lyrics by the faint light of the street lamps, his breath catching at the melody they seemed to carry within their ink. Who hears the song of winter's sigh when stars are veiled in frozen sky? If echoes call, then I shall stay to answer light in shadow's way. Liam exhaled, the words settling into his chest like an unspoken confession. Whoever this person was, they understood. They knew the ache of silence, the longing hidden between unspoken words. The melody came to him before he even realized he was humming it, the notes forming naturally as if they had always existed. He took a seat on the bench near the oak, pulled out his notebook, and with careful precision, began to write his response. When snowlight falls on hollow ground, a fleeting song may yet be found. If echoes reach where hearts have grieved, then winter's hush shall be relieved. Satisfied, he folded the note and tucked it beneath the tree's gnarled roots. He stood for a moment, staring down at it, then glanced around the square. Who was the mysterious writer? Was she watching him even now, just as he had watched for any sign of her? A sudden gust of wind sent a flurry of snowflakes spiraling around him, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something close to warmth spread through his chest. Across town, Alara sat curled up in her bookshop, candlelight flickering across the pages of the novel in her lap. But her eyes weren't focused on the words. Her thoughts were elsewhere, on the note she had left, on whether it had been found. And then, like the toll of a distant bell, the realization settled over her. She wasn't alone in her grief. Someone else was out there, listening to the same silent chord that had echoed in her heart for far too long. Tomorrow, she would return to the oak, and she would listen again. Chapter 5. The Music of a Ghosted Past. The air had grown colder as Christmas Eve neared, with a thick layer of snow turning the quiet streets of the town into a winter wonderland. Each day, Alara wandered the familiar paths, her thoughts drifting between the memory of her grandmother and the melody of the carols that had filled her heart since their first anonymous exchange. She couldn't deny it any longer. The music had become her solace, her way of holding on to a piece of her grandmother that felt like it was slipping through her fingers. Despite her growing attachment to the music, Alara couldn't shake the gnawing curiosity that had taken root in her heart. Who was the person behind the delicate, heartfelt songs that seemed to reach into her soul? Had they, too, been touched by loss? The question echoed in her mind, though she was afraid to seek the answer. There was something magical in the anonymity of it all, a bond that didn't need faces or names, only the shared language of music. The Christmas market was in full swing now, with twinkling lights casting a warm glow over the wooden stalls that lined the streets. Alara had taken a moment to step away from the crowd, seeking a quiet corner near the town's old church. The church bells rang out, filling the evening air with the promise of the approaching holiday. As Alara stood, lost in thought, she took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and spices that filled the market. It was then that she noticed him. Liam stood just a few feet away, staring at the church with an expression that was as distant as the first frost of winter. His coat, dark and well-worn, hugged his tall frame, and the scarf he wore was wrapped loosely around his neck, the ends fluttering in the wind. His dark hair, a little longer than most, swayed slightly, framing a face that was both familiar and foreign to her at the same time. There was something about him, a quiet intensity, a melancholy that seemed to follow him like a shadow. Alara couldn't help but stare, her heart giving an unexpected, erratic beat. Something about the way he stood there, as though the world was pressing down on him, caught her attention. She had seen him before, of course. Liam Hartley, the musician who had made a name for himself in the city with hauntingly beautiful melodies. His name was known to everyone in town, though she had never once spoken to him. The realization hit her slowly, almost like a breath she'd forgotten to take. Could he be the one? The composer of the carols? She quickly looked away, her cheeks flushing with a mix of embarrassment and uncertainty. What were the chances that this was the person who had been sharing her heart through music? She had no idea, of course. It could be anyone. Yet, the thought that he might be the one to unravel the mystery was both thrilling and terrifying. The world around her seemed to still for a moment, the laughter and chatter of the market fading into the background as Alara's gaze returned to Liam. He hadn't noticed her yet, lost in his thoughts, his hands shoved deep into his pockets as he stared at the church with an unreadable expression. Alara debated whether to approach him or not, unsure of what to say. She had never been good with words, let alone when confronted with someone so enigmatic. What could she possibly say to him? "I think you might be the one writing those beautiful carols?" It sounded absurd, even to her own ears. The mystery had been too perfect to ruin with such a bold statement. But just as she began to turn, a gust of wind swept through the narrow street, and she stumbled, her foot catching on a patch of ice. Before she could catch herself, her shoulder collided with Liam's, sending her off balance. "Oh," she gasped, flailing for a moment, her hands instinctively reaching out to steady herself. But it wasn't just the wind that had caught her. It was his strong grip, pulling her back to her feet with a gentle force that seemed to match the quiet strength in his eyes. "I'm so sorry," Alara stammered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Liam's dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. There was something in his gaze, something that made her heart race. He seemed equally caught off guard, as if her presence had shaken him from his reverie. "No harm done," Liam replied, his voice warm, though there was an edge to it. Something tired, something that spoke of long, lonely nights and a heart closed off from the world. He offered a small smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Alara took a step back, feeling the awkwardness settle between them like a thick fog. She could have sworn she recognized him, knew him from somewhere, but she couldn't place where or when. It was as though a forgotten dream had resurfaced, one she couldn't quite remember, but knew it held meaning. I didn't mean to run into you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Liam chuckled softly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's all right. I wasn't looking where I was going." A silence hung between them, awkward and heavy, but not unkind. Alara shifted, glancing at the ground, trying to find the right words. She wanted to say so much, but the words seemed tangled in her mind. She didn't want to seem too forward, especially when she still didn't even know who he really was. "Well, I should probably be going," she said quickly, her hand instinctively reaching for her coat collar, as though it would shield her from the unease blooming in her chest. Liam's gaze softened slightly, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Or perhaps it was just wishful thinking. "I'll see you around, I suppose," he said, offering a faint, almost wistful smile. With that, Alara turned, quickly walking away, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't quite explain why, but she felt like something had shifted in that brief encounter, as though a door had opened, just a crack, letting in a sliver of light she wasn't ready to face. But little did she know, that moment, the simple collision between two strangers, would set into motion something neither of them could have anticipated. The carols, the music, the mystery, they were all leading them to this moment, this crossroads. And it was just the beginning. Chapter 6. Harmonies in the Winter Wind. The wind whispered through the narrow streets of Winter's Hollow as Alara wrapped her scarf tighter around her neck. The town had transformed overnight into a twinkling haven of festive wonder. Strings of golden lights adorned shopfronts, wreaths decorated every door, and the scent of spiced cider drifted in the crisp air. Yet, none of it compared to the anticipation curling in her chest. She had spent the day lost in thought, the weight of the latest exchange pressing against her heart. There was something undeniably intimate about the way their words danced through the cold, binding them in a melody only they could hear. She longed to know who he was, but a part of her feared breaking the delicate magic of their connection. Liam found himself in much the same state, pacing the length of his cabin, his fingers strumming mindlessly at his guitar. He had reread the latest note at least a dozen times, each line carrying a depth of understanding he hadn't expected. Whoever she was, she saw him, perhaps even before they had met. That evening, he arrived at the oak tree once more, his breath curling into the night air as he placed his newest verse beneath the snow-dusted roots. Through winter's hush, a hope takes flight, a song that lingers past the night, a fleeting whisper, soft and true, a melody that leads to you. He lingered a moment longer this time, his eyes scanning the square for a sign of movement, but the world remained still, the only sound the distant chime of church bells. Alara arrived not long after, her heart hammering as she retrieved the note. As she read, a warmth spread through her, battling the winter's chill. The words were no longer just lyrics. They were a promise, a confession wrapped in mystery. She hurried back to her bookshop, lighting a candle at her writing desk. This time, she would reply with more than just another song. She would ask a question. Who writes the song in winter's glow? A name to match the words you show. If echoes call and answers hide, shall truth be found this Christmas tide? Folding the note with careful precision, she returned to the oak once more, her pulse racing. As she set it down, she hesitated, glancing around the empty square. Whoever he was, he held a piece of her now, and soon she might finally learn his name. Chapter 7. A Carol Without a Name. The night was cold, but the warmth of the Christmas market made it feel alive, vibrant, and full of possibility. Alara wandered through the twinkling lights, each stall offering its own charm. Handmade ornaments, warm mulled wine, and sweet treats that filled the air with their rich, spicy scents. But despite the bustling activity around her, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. The encounter with Liam had left an unexpected mark on her, one she couldn't quite understand. Her thoughts were still tangled around the brief meeting. His eyes, that fleeting smile, the softness in his voice. And yet, as much as she tried to focus on the present, her mind kept drifting back to the music, the carols. Could he be the one? The thought haunted her. It was too much of a coincidence, wasn't it? He had been so close, so near, and yet the puzzle remained unsolved. As she walked past the town's central square, she spotted the familiar figure of the old man who sold handcrafted instruments, a violin maker who had lived in the town for as long as anyone could remember. His shop was small, nestled between the bakery and the bookstore, but it was always a haven for those seeking something special. Alara had often passed by, admiring the violins, fiddles, and lutes that hung in the window, each one seeming to hum with a story of its own. She hadn't planned to stop, but something about the old shopkeeper's presence made her pause. He was standing in front of his stall, admiring a freshly strung violin as he muttered to himself. There was something about his demeanor that suggested he was lost in thought, perhaps caught between past and present, just as she was. As Alara approached, he looked up, his eyes crinkling in recognition. "Ah, Miss Alara. Been a while since I've seen you about. Is there something you've had your eye on?" His voice was warm, gruff with age, but welcoming. She smiled, though it was faint. "Just looking as always," she replied. "I never have the courage to ask for anything, but the music, it always catches my attention." The old man's gaze softened as he lowered the violin he was holding. He nodded knowingly, as though he understood the unspoken weight behind her words. "Ah, yes. Music's a funny thing, isn't it? It speaks without speaking. It carries more than just sound. It carries memories, hopes, and even secrets. You ever wonder, Miss Alara, about the music you can't hear? The songs that play between the lines?" Alara blinked, surprised by his insight. She had never thought about music that way, but it resonated with her. The carols, the ones she had been writing and exchanging, they felt like that. Like they were carrying something hidden, something just beyond her grasp. I don't know," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I've been writing some music lately, but it's strange. It feels like there's more to it, like someone is sending me their thoughts." The old man's eyes twinkled with understanding. Sometimes songs are a bridge between souls. They can connect people who never even meet, who don't even know each other. A melody passed from one heart to another, and before long, you start to recognize it. Maybe that's what you're hearing, or rather, feeling. Alara's heart skipped. Feeling. That was the perfect word for it. She had been feeling the music, but she hadn't been able to put it into words. It was as though the carols had been written by someone who understood her grief, her longing, her desire to reconnect with the Christmas spirit her grandmother had cherished. But who? Before she could ask more, the bell above the door of the shop jingled, signaling someone else's arrival. Alara turned to see a familiar figure, Liam. He was walking toward the stall with a purpose, though his usual air of quiet sadness seemed even more pronounced tonight. His coat was pulled tight against the cold, and his eyes were fixed on the ground as if lost in thought. When he reached the old man's stall, the shopkeeper gave him a knowing smile. "Liam Hartley," he said, his voice rich with affection. "Been a while since I saw you in these parts. I've got something here I think you might like." Liam looked up, his expression softening as he acknowledged the old man. "I wasn't planning on buying anything, just looking for something to pass the time," he said, his voice quieter than usual. The old man chuckled. "You never can just look, can you?" Liam's lips curled into a slight smile. "I guess not." Alara stepped back, trying to remain unnoticed, unsure of what to do now that he was here. She couldn't help but overhear their conversation as she lingered by the edge of the stall. The old man continued, his eyes twinkling. "You've been keeping to yourself, haven't you? Music's been quiet in your world these days, hasn't it?" Liam shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking to the side. "It's not that. I'm just not sure what to play anymore." His voice faltered slightly, and Alara's heart went out to him. There was something in his tone, something raw, something that spoke of a man trying to find his way back to something he had lost. The old man gave a small, understanding nod. "Sometimes the music has to find its own way back to you. You can't force it. It has to speak to you. But if you're ready to listen," he trailed off, his eyes lingering on Liam with a look that was almost like a quiet challenge. Liam stared at the violin in the shopkeeper's hands, his fingers twitching as if he wanted to reach for it, but hesitated. There was a tension between them, a silent exchange of words that neither spoke aloud. After a moment, Liam sighed, his shoulders slumping in resignation. "Maybe you're right," he said softly. "Maybe I've been waiting for something to guide me back." Alara's heart raced. She had no idea why she was still standing there, listening to their conversation, but she couldn't tear herself away. The words felt like a puzzle she was dying to solve. Music, silence, and the possibility of something more. She could almost hear the invisible threads connecting the two men, and perhaps, somewhere in those connections, the key to her own mystery lay. With a quiet nod, the old man handed Liam the violin. "It's time for you to play, son," he said, a finality in his voice. "Sometimes, you have to play the song that's been calling to you." Alara watched in silence as Liam cradled the instrument in his arms, his fingers brushing the strings lightly, as if testing their tension. The sound was soft at first, but as he drew the bow across the strings, a single note rang out, clear and beautiful, filling the quiet corner of the market. It was the beginning of a song, but it wasn't the whole story. Alara felt it then, a connection. The song he played, with its haunting beauty, felt strangely familiar, like something she had heard before. Could it be? Her heart beat faster as the realization struck her. He was the one. He had to be. And just like that, the song that had been a secret between them for so long was finally beginning to unfold. Chapter 8. The Crescendo of a Stranger. The music lingered in the air long after Liam put down the violin, his fingers still twitching with the memory of the song. The quiet note that had filled the market square like the first brushstroke on a canvas was followed by silence. Heavy, meaningful, and somehow charged. Alara stood frozen in place, her heart thundering in her chest. The melody Liam had played was so familiar, so deeply intertwined with the carols she had been writing in secret, that it felt as though the universe had opened its doors and let the answer spill through. For a moment, she thought she might collapse under the weight of it all. She had been searching for the truth, seeking the person behind the mysterious songs, and now, standing just a few feet away from him, everything seemed so clear. Liam, the musician she had admired from afar, was the very same person who had been composing the songs that had filled her heart over the last few weeks. The realization settled within her like a stone, heavy and undeniable. The shopkeeper watched them both, his knowing eyes twinkling with amusement as the air between them seemed to hum with unspoken understanding. "Sometimes, it's the quietest notes that speak the loudest," he said with a smile, clearly delighted by the connection he'd just witnessed. Alara barely heard him, her mind reeling as she tried to gather her thoughts. She had to do something, say something, anything to break the tension, but words eluded her, as they so often did. All she could do was stand there, feeling exposed and vulnerable under Liam's gaze, as if he could see right through her. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her coat, the cool air biting at her skin as she debated whether to step forward, to reveal everything. Liam, for his part, seemed to be grappling with his own thoughts, his brow furrowed, his gaze lingering on the violin as if it were the source of all his confusion. There was a restlessness in him, a kind of internal struggle that Alara could feel in the very air around them. He shifted, his foot tapping lightly against the ground, and then, as if making up his mind, he turned toward the old man. "I think I'll take it," Liam said, his voice low but steady. "I've been running away from my music long enough." The shopkeeper smiled, clearly pleased with his decision. "I'll wrap it up for you, then," he said, moving to prepare the violin for its new owner. Alara watched Liam with a mixture of awe and trepidation, unable to speak, unable to move. He knew. Somehow, he had known all along, just as she had. The carols they had exchanged, they were pieces of the same heart, fragments of the same longing. But even with this revelation, the distance between them remained. Liam caught her gaze for the briefest of moments before looking away, his cheeks flushed, as if embarrassed by the silence. He seemed just as unsure as she felt, as though he were waiting for something. An invitation, a question, an acknowledgement. But Alara had no words. The weight of everything she was feeling pressed down on her chest, and the space between them felt insurmountable. As the old man wrapped the violin in soft, worn cloth, Alara took a tentative step forward. She had to say something. She had to break the silence that felt as though it were growing between them, becoming thicker, more difficult to cross. But the words wouldn't come. The fear of revealing herself, of confessing the truth about her own involvement in the carol exchange, held her back. What would Liam think? Would he think it was foolish? Would he wonder if she had been following him, seeking him out? Liam, sensing her hesitation, took a small step toward her, his voice barely above a whisper. You heard it, didn't you?" His eyes were searching, soft, vulnerable. "The song." Alara nodded, her breath catching in her throat. "I did." She stopped herself, unsure of how to finish the sentence. How could she explain what had been happening between them, without sounding like she had imagined it all? How could she admit that she, too, had been composing songs, leaving them for him to find, without sounding like a fool? Liam's eyes softened, and he took a cautious step closer, his voice more certain now. "I knew it. I knew someone else was out there, someone who was writing the same songs I had been hearing in my head. I didn't think it was real, though. Didn't think anyone else was feeling it the way I was." His voice faltered for a moment, as if the words had finally caught up with him. "It's strange, isn't it? To find someone who understands something so deep and so personal, but not know who they are." The words hung in the air like fragile glass, shattering any remaining walls between them. Alara's heart swelled in her chest, the connection between them clearer now than ever. He wasn't just the musician she had admired from a distance. He was the person she had been waiting for, the person who had been composing the very songs that had helped her heal. "I didn't know," Alara said softly, the words finally slipping out. "I didn't know you were the one writing them." "The carols," she faltered, trying to find the right words to convey what she was feeling. "They've been helping me. They've been keeping me connected to my grandmother, to the Christmas spirit I've lost." Liam's expression softened, and for the first time, Alara saw the vulnerability that had always been hidden behind his guarded exterior. His eyes seemed to reach into her soul as he spoke, his voice gentle, almost tender. I never meant to make anyone else feel this way. But the music, it's been my way of surviving. I didn't know it would find its way to you. Alara took a small, hesitant step closer to him, her hands trembling at her sides. She had been afraid of what this moment would mean, of what it would reveal about her own heart. But now, standing before him, she knew that everything had changed. I wrote them for you, she said, her voice steady now. I didn't know who you were, but I could feel your presence in every note. It was as if I was writing to someone who would understand, someone who was waiting for it. Liam's eyes widened, a flicker of realization crossing his face. He stepped closer, his voice barely audible. You were the one leaving the carols? All this time? Alara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. There was no going back now, no hiding from the truth. They had both been caught in the same web of music, of longing, of loss. And now, finally, they stood on the edge of it, ready to take the leap together. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was charged with something unspoken, something powerful, and in that silence, everything else faded away. The town, the market, the cold night. They were nothing compared to the connection they had found in each other's eyes. It was a song that had been written long before either of them had realized it, a melody that was finally coming to life. And as Liam reached out, taking Alara's hand in his, the world around them seemed to shift, to hum with the promise of something new. Something beautiful, something that neither of them had expected, but both had been waiting for. Chapter 9. Verses left in candlelight. The snow had begun to fall more heavily, blanketing the town in a quiet, peaceful hush. Alara and Liam stood at the edge of the market, where the sounds of laughter and chatter faded into the background, replaced by a more intimate silence. Their hands were still intertwined, and as the snowflakes danced around them, they stood in a world that felt entirely their own. The bustling market was now a distant memory, fading into the glow of the streetlights and the soft fall of winter's embrace. But it wasn't just the snow that made the world feel different. No, it was something far deeper. As Alara looked into Liam's eyes, a profound sense of connection washed over her. She had been searching for something, for someone, for so long. She had written the carols, not knowing who would hear them, not knowing that they would reach him. But now, with him standing so close, the unspoken truth between them hanging in the air like an unfinished melody, everything felt impossibly clear. It wasn't just the songs that had connected them. It was their shared grief, their mutual longing for something they had lost. Alara's grandmother, Liam's past heartbreak, the way both of them had retreated into themselves, into their art, to survive. The music had been their only lifeline, and now, it had brought them together in the most unexpected way. Liam's thumb brushed gently over her hand, a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. He seemed just as overwhelmed by everything as she was, the weight of their shared moment pressing down on them both. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft, almost reverent. "So, it was you all along," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "You were the one behind the carols. I've been listening to them, waiting for something. I didn't know what. But now that I know it's you, it feels like everything has changed." Alara swallowed hard, her chest tightening. The words she had longed to hear for so long, the words that connected them so perfectly, were now hanging in the air. But with them came a new realization, one that was harder to accept than she would have liked. "I didn't expect this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect to meet you, to feel this. It's like everything I've been writing, all the songs I've been sending out into the world, they were meant for you. But now that we're standing here, I don't know where to go from here." Liam tilted his head, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He took a step closer, his breath visible in the cold night air. I didn't expect it either. I didn't expect to feel this way. It's like I've been waiting for you, for these carols to lead me somewhere. And now that I'm standing here with you, it feels like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be. Alara's heart skipped a beat at his words. It felt surreal, like a dream she hadn't dared to hope for. She had spent so many months lost in her grief, in her memories of her grandmother, and in the quiet solace of her own music. She hadn't realized, until now, that she had been waiting for this connection, this moment with Liam. But even as the words hung between them, the doubt began to creep in, as it always did. I'm scared, Alara admitted, her voice trembling slightly. I'm scared that this is all too good to be true, that I've built this up in my head, and that when it comes down to it, we won't be able to make this work. Liam's eyes softened, and he reached up to gently cup her cheek. The touch was so tender, so reassuring, that it almost made her heart break with the vulnerability she felt. I'm scared too, he confessed, his voice barely a breath. But sometimes the scariest things are the ones worth fighting for. And I think we've been brought together for a reason. Alara closed her eyes at the warmth of his touch, her breath catching in her throat. The words were so simple, but they held a weight that made her want to believe. Fighting for this. She had never thought about it that way before. She had spent so long protecting herself, afraid to love, afraid to let anyone close. But now, standing with Liam, her heart felt like it was finally allowing itself to be open, to take the risk. You really think so? She asked softly, opening her eyes to meet his. Liam nodded, his gaze unwavering. I do. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I want to try. I want to see where this, whatever this is, takes us. Together. Alara's breath caught in her chest, and a wave of emotion swept over her. She had never been one to easily let her guard down, to believe in love after everything she had been through. But in that moment, with the snow falling gently around them, with the soft glow of Christmas lights flickering above, she felt something stir inside her that she hadn't felt in so long. Hope. I think I want that too, she whispered, her voice breaking slightly with the weight of her own emotions. I think I want to see where this can go. The moment hung between them, suspended in the quiet of the snowy evening, as if the world itself were holding its breath. And then, as if some invisible force had finally given them permission to move forward, Liam took a small step closer, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was gentle, tentative, and yet full of a promise that neither of them could fully understand. It was a kiss that was years in the making, a kiss that had been written in the very music they had shared, in the spaces between the notes, in the longing they both felt deep within their hearts. When they finally pulled away, their foreheads resting together, their breaths mingling in the cold air, the world seemed to fall into a peaceful silence. The uncertainty that had plagued them both had not disappeared completely, but in that moment, it felt smaller, more manageable. Together, they could face whatever lay ahead. Whatever happens, Liam murmured, his voice hushed but firm. I want to face it with you. Alara smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek as she nodded. Me too. I think I've been waiting for this, for us, for so long. I just didn't know it until now. The snow continued to fall, soft and endless, and the lights of the Christmas market flickered like stars in the distance. Alara knew that there would be obstacles ahead, that their journey together would not be without its challenges. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. She didn't feel like she had to carry her grief, her doubts, or her fears by herself. In that moment, she realized that the carols she had been composing weren't just for herself. They were a message, a bridge, reaching across time and space to bring her to this very moment. A moment where she could finally open her heart to something new, to something beautiful. And as she and Liam walked side by side into the snowy night, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The music wasn't just a gift. It was the beginning of something even greater, something they would build together, note by note, one song at a time. Chapter 10. The Silence Between the Notes. The days that followed felt like a dream to Alara. The world outside had settled into a hushed winter wonderland, with each street corner adorned with festive lights and wreaths. The town, once a backdrop to her grief, had transformed into a place of warmth and possibility. The carols, the music, and now, the presence of Liam. Everything had changed, and she found herself waking up each morning with a feeling of quiet anticipation, as though the days were full of new beginnings waiting to unfold. Still, the weight of their connection, the songs they shared, the hidden emotions that had been woven into each note, lingered between them, unspoken but deeply felt. Though they had confessed their truths to one another, there was an uncharted territory they hadn't yet ventured into. The truth of their hearts had been laid bare, but the pasts they both carried, those silent burdens, remained unexamined. Liam had been quieter than usual, thoughtful in a way that made Alara wonder what was going through his mind. She knew he was still carrying the remnants of his past, just as she was. There were moments when his smile didn't reach his eyes, when his gaze drifted to something unseen in the distance. And in those moments, Alara felt the sharp sting of the unknown. There was still more to uncover, more to understand about each other, and she couldn't help but wonder. Would the weight of the past threaten to unravel what they were beginning to build? One cold morning, the town square felt particularly still. The air was crisp, the sky overcast with clouds that hung heavy, as though holding onto the secret of something yet to come. Alara had agreed to meet Liam at the cafe, a small corner shop they had visited once or twice before. As she walked toward it, her steps crunching against the frozen ground, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves. The promise of new beginnings was there, yes, but so was the fear that perhaps the past could not be outrun so easily. She entered the cafe, the warmth of the room immediately enveloping her, a stark contrast to the cold outside. Liam was already there, seated at a table by the window. He glanced up as she walked in, and for a moment, his eyes softened with a look that made Alara's heart skip. But just as quickly, the moment passed, replaced by the same contemplative expression he had worn all week. Alara smiled as she approached him, trying to shake off the feeling that there was something heavier at play beneath the surface. "Good morning," she said, taking a seat across from him. "Morning," Liam replied, his voice gentle but distant. He motioned toward the cup of tea in front of him. "I ordered for you. Thought you might like something warm." "Thank you," Alara said, gratefully accepting the cup. She took a sip, the warmth spreading through her fingers. But as she set the cup down, she couldn't help but notice how Liam's eyes kept flicking to the window, as though he were waiting for something, or someone, to appear. "You've been quiet lately," she said, her voice soft but steady, trying not to push too hard. "Is everything okay?" Liam hesitated, and for a moment, Alara wondered if he would answer her at all. Finally, he met her gaze, his expression uncertain. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, his voice almost as quiet as the snow falling outside. "About the music, about the carols, and about us." Alara's pulse quickened. "About us." It was the phrase that had become the center of everything, yet it also felt like an elusive concept, something both clear and still, something fragile. She set her cup down and leaned forward, her attention fully on him. "What about us?" Liam took a deep breath, his fingers tapping lightly against the surface of the table. "I think I've been holding back," he admitted, his eyes clouded with uncertainty. "Not just with you, but with myself. I've spent so much of my life burying the parts of me that hurt, the parts of me that are afraid of failing again. And now, with you, I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something so much bigger than I ever expected. But I'm scared. I don't know how to be vulnerable without losing myself." Alara's heart ached as she listened to him, her fingers tightening around the edges of her cup. She knew exactly how he felt. She, too, had hidden away parts of herself, parts that ached from the loss of her grandmother, parts that had been shaped by grief and fear. But now, with Liam, something had shifted. She could feel it in her bones. The songs they had exchanged, the connection they had fostered, were not just an accident. They were the bridge they both needed to cross. But it wasn't going to be easy. "I understand," she said softly, her voice quiet but firm. "I feel the same way. I've been holding on to the memory of my grandmother, to the past that I'm afraid to let go of. I've been writing these carols, hoping they'll bring me some kind of peace. But I haven't been at peace, Liam. Not really." Liam's gaze softened, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other, the weight of their shared vulnerability hanging in the air between them. There was a quiet understanding that passed between them, something unspoken but deeply felt. "I think," Alara continued, her voice trembling slightly, "that we've both been trying to find a way to move forward, to heal. And I want to heal, Liam. I want to let go of the things that are holding me back. But I need to know that I'm not doing it alone." Liam reached across the table, his hand finding hers, and for the first time in days, Alara saw the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. It was hesitant, as if he weren't entirely sure how to trust it, but it was there. "You're not alone," he said softly. "I'm right here. I want to do this with you. Together." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Alara's heart swell. She had spent so long fearing that she couldn't share the depths of her heart, that no one could understand the loneliness that had taken root inside her. But now, with Liam, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could begin to heal. For the rest of the morning, they talked, their conversation meandering from the carols to the town's Christmas traditions, from their hopes for the future to their fears about the past. But beneath every word, beneath every exchange, there was an unspoken promise between them, an acknowledgement that the past, while difficult, didn't have to define them. They could create something new, something beautiful, together. As they parted ways, Alara felt a renewed sense of clarity. There was still much to explore between them, still so much to understand. But in that moment, she knew one thing for sure. The journey ahead was theirs to take, and for the first time in a long while, she was ready to take it. Chapter 11. A Duet in the Dark. The week leading up to Christmas had arrived in earnest, and with it came a sense of urgency, a fleeting moment in time when everything seemed to gather in the stillness before the world erupted in celebration. The snow had not stopped falling, a delicate cascade that transformed the town into a living, breathing winter wonderland. Streets were lined with festive lights, windows adorned with wreaths, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and cinnamon, of gingerbread and mulled wine. But for Alara, there was something else, something more. A sense of anticipation, of change, of beginnings and endings all wrapped up in the same breath. The carols she had written were no longer just a way of honoring her grandmother. They had become something far more intimate. They had become the soundtrack of her journey toward healing, toward love. They had become her story, a story she was now sharing with Liam. As Christmas Eve approached, Alara found herself standing at the window of her small apartment, looking out at the softly falling snow, her thoughts a whirl of anticipation and uncertainty. She had written her last carol, the one she had been crafting in the quiet of the early mornings for days now, and she knew it was time. Time to offer it to Liam. Time to reveal the depth of what had been growing between them, the silent melody they had been building with each note, each exchange. But there was still one thing that lingered in the back of her mind. The question of whether their bond could truly stand the test of time, whether the music they had shared could carry them through the challenges that lay ahead. Their connection had blossomed in secret, in the quiet spaces between the carols, in the letters they had exchanged. But now, with Christmas on the horizon, she felt the weight of what came next. The world would no longer be watching from the sidelines. She and Liam would have to decide, truly decide, if they were ready to step into the light together. The knock on her door came just as she was finishing the last line of her carol. She froze for a moment, her pen still poised over the paper, and then stood up with a soft breath, her heart quickening. She knew who it was without having to look through the peephole. No one else had the ability to make her feel the way she did when Liam appeared at her door. When she opened it, there he was, standing in the doorway, his breath visible in the cold air, his eyes bright with the same mixture of warmth and mystery that always seemed to accompany him. His jacket was dusted with snow, his hair tousled from the wind, but there was a softness in his gaze that made Alara's heart skip a beat. It was the kind of look that spoke volumes, the kind that could only be earned through shared vulnerability, through quiet moments of understanding. "Hi," he said, his voice low but warm, the corners of his mouth curling upward in a smile that reached his eyes. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Alara shook her head, the words catching in her throat. She hadn't expected him to come by so soon, but the moment felt right. Everything felt right, and yet, she couldn't shake the sense of nervousness that buzzed through her. "You're not interrupting," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "I was just finishing something. Would you like some tea?" Liam nodded, stepping into the warmth of her apartment, brushing the snow from his shoulders. As he removed his scarf and gloves, Alara couldn't help but notice how at ease he seemed. Despite the weight of the moment hanging between them, there was something undeniably calming about him, about the way he filled the space with quiet certainty. "I'd love some tea," he said with a smile, his gaze flickering briefly to the small Christmas tree she had set up in the corner, its twinkling lights casting a soft glow across the room. "It looks beautiful in here. I can almost feel the magic of the season." Alara smiled, feeling the warmth of his words settle in her chest. "Thank you. I've been trying to make it feel more festive, more like the Christmas I remember." She paused, glancing down at her hands before meeting his eyes again. "I've been thinking a lot about what we've shared, about the carols, and about us." Liam, who had been unbuttoning his coat, stopped at her words and looked up. "I've been thinking a lot about that too," he said quietly, "about how much has changed since we first started exchanging those songs. I feel like I've been waiting for something like this, for you, for so long." His words made Alara's heart ache with an intensity she hadn't expected. She wasn't sure what it was about the simplicity of his confession, but it reached deep into her, stirring something raw and beautiful. The kettle began to whistle, breaking the moment, and Alara quickly moved to pour the tea, her hands shaking slightly. When she returned to the small table with 2 steaming cups, she sat down opposite Liam, her breath catching in her throat as she watched him carefully. "I've written one more," she said after a moment, her voice quieter now, tinged with uncertainty. "A final one. The one I've been working on in the quiet of my mornings. And I want you to have it. It's for you, Liam, for everything we've shared." Liam's eyes softened, and he leaned forward slightly, as though trying to understand the weight of her words. "You've written one more for me?" Alara nodded, pulling the folded sheet of music from the table beside her. "I've been composing it for days, and it's not just a carol, it's a letter of sorts. A letter to you, about everything we've shared, about what I've been feeling." She pushed the sheet of music toward him, her fingers trembling as she did so. "It's not just about Christmas anymore, Liam. It's about us. And I wanted you to hear it." Liam looked at the music for a long moment, his eyes tracing the notes, before slowly lifting his gaze to meet hers. "I'm honored," he said, his voice low. "And I think it's time for me to share something with you too." Alara blinked in surprise, her heart picking up speed. "What do you mean?" Liam reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small, folded piece of paper. It wasn't a song or a melody, it was a letter. With a small, shy smile, he handed it to her. "I've been composing something for you too," he said, his voice soft, almost shy. "But I've written it in words. A letter, because words are the only way I can fully express what's in my heart." Alara's breath caught in her throat as she took the letter from him, her hands unsteady as she unfolded it. As she began to read, her heart swelled with emotion, with the realization that everything between them was unfolding just as it was meant to. When she finished reading, she looked up at him, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. She didn't need to say anything, for the silence between them spoke volumes. The music, the words, the connection they had found. It was all there, laid out before them. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for sharing this with me." Liam smiled softly, his eyes full of unspoken emotion. "Thank you for sharing your music, your heart, for showing me what it means to truly live again, to feel again." And in that moment, as the soft glow of Christmas Eve filled the room and the snow continued to fall outside, Alara knew that this was only the beginning. The journey ahead was uncertain, yes, but it was theirs to take together. And that was enough. Chapter 12. The Voice Behind the Melody. The sun had set on Christmas Eve, and the world outside was blanketed in a layer of soft, shimmering snow, the kind that caught the light from the street lamps and cast everything in a magical glow. Inside Alara's small apartment, the warmth of the fireplace was a welcome contrast to the chill that lingered in the air. The scent of pine and cinnamon still hung in the air, and the soft glow of the Christmas tree lights reflected off the window panes, creating a peaceful ambience. Liam sat across from Alara, his hand resting gently on the table, his fingers grazing the edges of the sheet music she had given him. He hadn't stopped looking at it since she handed it to him, his eyes tracing the delicate notes and lyrics with an intensity that made Alara's heart swell. For a long time, there had been a wall between them, an invisible barrier created by their fears, their pasts, and their hesitations. But now, as they sat there in the quiet of the evening, Alara could feel that wall beginning to crumble. The connection between them was no longer just something that existed in the space between their carols. It had become a shared understanding, a bond that transcended music and words. It was something deeper. "I've never received anything like this before," Liam said quietly, his voice almost reverent as he finally lifted his gaze from the sheet music to meet her eyes. "It's beautiful, Alara. You've captured something here that I don't think anyone else could." Alara smiled softly, her heart beating faster at the sincerity in his voice. She had been nervous, so nervous about sharing this final piece with him, but now she felt a sense of relief wash over her. "It's a little personal," she admitted, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I didn't know how to express everything I've been feeling, but I think this is the best way I could." Liam reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers in a fleeting touch that made her heart skip a beat. "You've done more than express it, Alara. You've shown me how deeply you feel, and I'm not sure I can ever fully put into words how much that means to me." For a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. It was as though time had paused, and all that existed in that space was them, two people who had found something precious in each other's company. They were no longer two strangers who had exchanged songs in the quiet of the town square. They were something more. They were two people who had shared their pain, their dreams, and their hearts, and in doing so, had found something that felt like home. Alara's fingers trembled slightly as she clasped her hands together, trying to steady the emotions that were swirling within her. I'm glad I shared it with you. I wasn't sure I could, but now I don't know why I waited. Liam smiled, the expression warm and genuine. You didn't have to wait. We both needed time. Time to find each other. Time to heal. And now that we've found this, his voice trailed off, and Alara could see the emotion reflected in his eyes. I don't want to let it go. Alara nodded, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't need him to say anything more. She could feel it in her bones, the unspoken promise between them. They had both been waiting for something to heal the wounds of their pasts. And now, that something was here. In this room, in the space between their hearts. You're right, she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. I don't want to let it go either. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the passage of time as they sat together, basking in the warmth of the moment. It was as though the rest of the world had disappeared, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. After a few moments, Alara glanced toward the small tree in the corner, its lights twinkling like tiny stars in the darkness. I've been thinking, she said, her voice quiet but firm, about what you said, about how this Christmas feels different. About how you feel. Liam tilted his head slightly, his gaze fixed on her with a mix of curiosity and tenderness. What do you mean? I mean, Alara hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. I've spent so much time mourning the past, mourning my grandmother, mourning the loss of what I thought Christmas should be. But with you, Liam, I feel like I'm finally able to let go of that. I feel like I can open myself to something new. Liam's eyes softened, and his lips parted as though he were about to say something, but he paused, as if choosing his words with the same care Alara had. I feel the same way, he said finally, his voice steady. I think, for so long, I've been holding on to the idea of what Christmas used to be for me. The traditions, the family, everything that's changed. But with you, Alara, I've realized that it's not about the past anymore. It's about the present and the future. Alara's heart skipped a beat at his words. The future? She repeated, her voice trembling slightly. Liam nodded, his expression sincere. The future, what we make of it, and what we can build together. The silence that followed was filled with the weight of his words, the magnitude of the promise they held. Alara felt her breath catch in her throat as she met his gaze. There it was again, the feeling of being at the edge of something new, something she hadn't allowed herself to believe in for so long. We can make it whatever we want, Alara said softly, her voice laced with a new sense of certainty. Together, Liam smiled, a soft, almost shy smile that made Alara's heart swell. Together, and then, without another word, he stood up, walked over to the Christmas tree, and pulled a small, carefully wrapped package from under the branches. I have something for you, he said, his eyes bright with the same warmth that had been there since he arrived. Alara blinked in surprise as he handed her the gift. You didn't have to. I wanted to, Liam interrupted gently, a soft chuckle escaping his lips. I've been thinking about you, about everything we've shared, and I wanted to give you something to remind you of this Christmas. A Christmas that feels different, special. Alara unwrapped the gift carefully, her fingers trembling slightly as she revealed a small, silver locket. It was delicate, with intricate designs etched into the surface, and inside, there was a small, folded piece of paper. She opened it and found a handwritten note inside. For the future we'll build together. A future where we're no longer alone. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at Liam, unable to speak for a moment. The words in the note, the locket, everything about the gift was a symbol of what they were building. It was a promise, and it was a piece of the future they had both longed for. "Liam," Alara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Liam replied, his voice warm and steady. "Just know that I'm here. Always." In that moment, as they stood there together, under the soft glow of the Christmas tree, surrounded by the quiet magic of the season, Alara knew that the journey they had begun, through their carols, through their shared vulnerability, had led them here, to this moment. And with Liam by her side, she knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. And that was enough. Chapter 13. Carols of Unfinished Love. Christmas morning arrived softly, as though the earth itself had decided to slow its rotation just for a little while. The town of Brindlewood, still cloaked in its blanket of snow, seemed almost suspended in time. The air was crisp, fresh with the promise of new beginnings, and the town square was quiet, save for the occasional crunch of boots on snow or the distant hum of laughter rising from the homes of the townspeople. Alara awoke early, the pale light of dawn creeping through the curtains of her small apartment. The soft, ethereal glow filled the room, casting long shadows that stretched across the walls. She lay there for a moment, savoring the quiet, letting the stillness settle in her bones. It was a rare feeling, this sense of peace. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to wake up with nothing but calm in her chest, no heavy weight of grief pressing against her heart. The ache was still there, but it was different now, softer, gentler. Liam was still sleeping beside her, his presence a comforting warmth that made her feel safe, like she wasn't alone in the world anymore. He had stayed the night, a quiet and unspoken promise hanging between them. They had talked long into the evening, sharing memories, hopes, and dreams, their hearts opening to each other with a tenderness that Alara had never known before. She turned her head to glance at him, the soft rise and fall of his chest beneath the covers steady and peaceful. He looked so different in sleep, vulnerable in a way she hadn't expected, and it made her heart swell with affection. She had never thought she would share a Christmas morning with someone like this, someone who made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. It had been the carols that had drawn them together. The anonymous exchange of music had bridged the gap between their worlds, drawing them into a shared space where they could heal, where they could let down their guard and allow themselves to feel again. But now, as the first light of Christmas morning bathed the room in its gentle glow, Alara realized that it wasn't the carols alone that had brought them here. It was the courage to open their hearts, to step into the unknown and trust that love could still bloom, even after loss. She shifted slightly, careful not to wake him, and slipped out of bed. The quiet of the apartment was a balm. The only sounds the soft creak of the floorboards beneath her feet and the gentle flutter of the curtains in the light breeze. She moved toward the small kitchen, where the scent of brewing coffee filled the air. The kitchen was cozy, warm with the faint smell of cinnamon from the spice-filled candles she'd lit the night before. It was the perfect setting for a quiet morning, the kind of morning Alara had dreamed of for so long. As she poured herself a cup of coffee, her thoughts wandered to the gift Liam had given her the night before. The silver locket, with its intricate engraving and the promise it held, still lay in her pocket. She hadn't wanted to take it off. It felt like a piece of the future, something solid she could hold on to as they stepped into the unknown together. It was her reminder that the past no longer defined her, that it was the present, the choices she made now, that would shape her path. She turned back to find Liam awake, his eyes meeting hers across the room with a soft smile. He was propped up on one elbow, his tousled hair falling across his forehead, and there was a peacefulness about him that made Alara's heart ache. "Good morning," he said, his voice husky from sleep, but warm and sincere. "Good morning," she replied softly, returning his smile as she moved back to the bed, coffee in hand. She sat down beside him, her fingers brushing against his as she passed him his own cup. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, sipping their coffee and simply enjoying the peacefulness of the morning. It was hard to believe that just days ago, they had been strangers, their hearts closed off and guarded. And now, here they were, sharing a Christmas morning together, their connection undeniable, woven together with music, shared vulnerability, and a deep, quiet understanding. "I can't believe it's Christmas already," Alara said quietly, glancing toward the window where the snowflakes continued to fall in delicate patterns outside. "It feels like it came so fast." Liam nodded, his gaze distant for a moment as though reflecting on the same thought. "I know what you mean, but at the same time, it feels like this moment has been a long time coming, like it's been waiting for us all along, just waiting for us to find each other." Alara's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had been thinking the same thing, but hearing him say it aloud made it feel even more real. Their connection had been inevitable, born of shared loss and quiet longing, and now, as Christmas morning unfolded around them, it felt like the world was finally aligning in their favor. There was a knock at the door, breaking the stillness between them. Alara glanced at Liam, her eyebrows raised in silent curiosity. He shrugged slightly, a playful glint in his eyes. "Do you think it's Santa?" Alara laughed softly, the sound warm and unguarded. "I highly doubt it, but maybe it's a Christmas miracle." Liam stood, moving toward the door with a teasing smile, and Alara followed him, the warmth of their shared laughter still lingering between them. When he opened the door, there stood Mrs. Bailey, the elderly neighbor who had welcomed Alara into the town with open arms when she first arrived. She held a small basket of freshly baked bread, the warmth of it wafting through the door. "Merry Christmas, dear," Mrs. Bailey said with a bright smile, her eyes twinkling with the cheer of the season. "I thought you might like some fresh bread to start your day, and I brought enough to share with your friend." She cast a knowing glance at Liam, who smiled back warmly. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Bailey," Alara said, her heart swelling with gratitude. "That's so kind of you." Mrs. Bailey beamed. "Oh, it's my pleasure. It's not much, but I thought you might appreciate it." The three of them stood there for a few moments, exchanging pleasantries and laughing softly. Mrs. Bailey's warmth was infectious, and her presence seemed to complete the quiet beauty of the morning. The simple act of sharing Christmas bread with a friend, someone who had become a part of Alara's world, reminded her of the deeper magic of the season. It wasn't about grand gestures or lavish gifts. It was about connection, about finding joy in the small moments, in the people who made life a little brighter. As Mrs. Bailey left, her parting words hung in the air like a blessing. "Enjoy the day, both of you. Christmas has a way of bringing the best of us to light." Alara closed the door softly behind her, her heart full as she turned to face Liam. "It's perfect, isn't it?" she said, her voice soft and thoughtful. "Everything about this day, everything about this moment, it feels like we're exactly where we're meant to be." Liam nodded, his hand finding hers once again, their fingers interlacing with ease. "It does," he agreed, his voice filled with conviction. "And I think we're just getting started." With that, they turned toward the tree, where a small gift waited beneath the twinkling lights. There was no need for words now, just the quiet understanding that the Christmas they had shared was only the beginning of the life they would build together. And that, Alara realized, was the true magic of Christmas. Chapter 14. The Rhythm of Falling Snow. The days following Christmas unfolded slowly, as if the entire town of Brindlewood had taken a collective breath, savoring the stillness that came after the holiday rush. The streets were quieter now, the festive decorations coming down, and the sound of carolers had long since faded into memory. Yet, despite the calm, there was a sense of anticipation in the air. an unspoken understanding that the magic of Christmas had not disappeared, but had settled quietly into the hearts of those who had allowed it to touch them. For Alara and Liam, the days felt like a continuation of the promise they had made to each other on that Christmas morning. They had shared so much in the days leading up to the holiday, the exchange of songs, the quiet moments of laughter, and the shared vulnerability that had opened the doors of their hearts. And now, as the world outside began to shift into the new year, they found themselves standing at the threshold of something new, a life that was both fragile and full of possibility. Alara had taken a few days off from her usual routine, using the time to settle into the quiet joy of her new reality. She had spent years mourning the loss of her grandmother, allowing grief to define so much of her life. But now, with Liam by her side, that grief no longer felt like a weight she had to carry alone. It had become a part of her, yes, but it no longer controlled her. Instead, she felt the pull of something more, something that had been quietly growing inside her, something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Liam, too, seemed to be settling into the rhythm of life in Brindlewood. He had been distant at first, hesitant to let himself get too comfortable in a place so far from the bustle of the city, but over time, he had begun to find solace in the simplicity of life here. The cold air, the quiet streets, the small town that seemed to embrace its own kind of magic. It all felt like a balm to the wounds he had carried for so long. With Alara, he had found a kind of peace he hadn't known he was searching for. On this particular afternoon, they found themselves walking through the town square, their boots crunching softly in the snow. The sky above was overcast, the clouds hanging heavy with the promise of more snow, but the air was crisp and fresh, filling their lungs with each breath they took. As they walked side by side, neither of them spoke much, content in the comfortable silence that had grown between them. It was a silence that no longer felt awkward or strained. It felt like the natural extension of everything they had shared. As they reached the old wooden bench in the square, the one where Alara had first noticed Liam, sitting alone and lost in thought, Liam paused, his gaze fixed on the spot. "I remember sitting here last year," he said quietly, his voice thoughtful. "I had come to Brindlewood to escape. I didn't know what I was running from, but I thought being here, in this quiet place, might help me figure it out." Alara looked at him, her heart stirring at his words. She had known that Liam had come to Brindlewood seeking solace, but hearing him speak of it so plainly made her realize just how far they had both come. "And did it help?" she asked softly. Liam turned to face her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she had rarely seen. "It did," he said with a quiet certainty. "It helped more than I could have imagined, but not in the way I expected. I thought I needed to be alone. I thought that solitude would heal me. But then I met you." Alara's breath caught in her throat at his words. Her heart swelled with a mixture of surprise and warmth. She had known that their connection was something special, but hearing him speak of it so plainly, without hesitation, made it feel all the more real. "I never expected to find someone like you here," Liam continued, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I never expected to find someone who understood me in ways I didn't even know I needed. You've made me believe in something again, Alara." Alara reached out to touch his hand, her fingers brushing against his in a gentle, reassuring gesture. "You've made me believe in something too," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "In all the time I've spent here, I never thought I'd find a connection like this. But I did. With you." Liam squeezed her hand, his gaze never leaving hers. "I don't think I'm ready to leave this town," he said softly. "I don't think I'm ready to leave you." Alara felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she didn't try to wipe it away. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of something else, something hopeful. "I don't want you to leave," she whispered. "I want us to stay here, together." Liam smiled, his eyes filled with the kind of tenderness that made Alara's heart ache. Then we'll stay together. The promise hung between them, unspoken but clear, like a song that had yet to be played. They didn't need words to understand each other. They were building something, piece by piece, moment by moment, something real, something that would endure. As the day wore on, they found themselves drawn to the town's small cafe, a cozy little spot that smelled of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls. It was the same cafe where Alara had first found the courage to sing her carols aloud, where she had begun to believe in the magic of the town and in herself. Now, it felt like a symbol of everything they had built together. They ordered their usuals, Liam's coffee with a shot of hazelnut, Alara's chai latte, and settled into a corner booth by the window, the soft hum of conversation surrounding them. Outside, the snow began to fall again, the world outside becoming even more peaceful as the day drew to a close. As they sat there, Alara's fingers rested lightly on the table, a thought slowly forming in her mind. She had been thinking a lot about the future lately, about what it might look like for them. She hadn't said it aloud, but she knew that the time had come for her to take another step forward, to share something more. "I've been thinking about our carols," she said, her voice soft but steady. "The ones we exchanged last year. I never expected them to bring us together like this, but they did. They helped me find a part of myself I had lost." Liam raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" I think it's time we wrote something together. A song for the future," Alara said, her heart racing as she spoke the words. "Not just for the past or the present, but for what we're building, for what's next." Liam's smile was slow but certain, his eyes alight with the same excitement Alara felt. "I think that sounds like the perfect idea," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "A song for the future, for us." And so, in that quiet cafe, surrounded by the soft music of the world and the gentle fall of snow, they began to create something new. It wasn't just a song, it was a declaration, a promise that, together, they would face whatever came next, that the music they had shared would continue to play, weaving them ever closer, one note at a time. As they began to write the first lines, the world outside seemed to fade away. And for the first time in a long time, Alara felt the weight of everything she had been carrying slip away, replaced by something lighter, something that made her heart soar. It was the beginning of their future, and it was beautiful. Chapter 15. A Serenade Beneath the Stars. The weeks that followed Christmas were filled with a quiet sort of magic that seemed to permeate every moment. The snow continued to fall in soft, steady layers, blanketing Brindlewood in a pristine, almost otherworldly silence. The town square, which had once been alive with the hustle and bustle of the holiday season, now stood in peaceful stillness, as if it, too, was taking a moment to catch its breath. For Alara and Liam, the days were marked not by the rush of New Year's celebrations, but by small, meaningful moments that had come to define their time together. They spent their mornings writing music in the cafe, the rhythm of their collaboration weaving them closer with each passing note. There was a new energy between them now, a sense of shared purpose that had taken root in the music they created. The song they had started writing together was slowly taking shape, a song for the future, as Alara had called it. It was a reflection of the hopes and dreams they had begun to share, a testament to the possibility that lay ahead. The melody itself was simple, almost childlike in its innocence, yet rich with the promise of something deeper. It was a song about starting over, about finding love in the most unexpected of places, and about the courage to embrace the future, no matter how uncertain it might seem. They wrote it in fragments, one line here, a chorus there, allowing the song to grow naturally, like a conversation between two souls that had just begun to understand each other. As much as the music drew them together, the time spent in each other's presence was equally transformative. Liam had become a fixture in Alara's daily life, someone she could rely on, someone who made the mundane feel extraordinary. Whether they were cooking dinner together in her small kitchen, sharing a quiet evening by the fire, or taking long walks through the snow-covered streets, each moment felt like a new chapter in the story they were writing together. One particularly cold afternoon, they found themselves walking to the old bookshop at the far end of town. It was a small, charming place, tucked away behind a row of snow-covered trees, its windows glowing with the soft light of the lamps inside. Alara had always loved the smell of old books, the musty pages, and the warmth of the place that seemed to offer a kind of solace, just as the music they had been creating did. Liam had suggested the outing, his voice laced with a playful hint. "I think we could use a bit of inspiration," he'd said, his eyes sparkling with that familiar glint of mischief. "And I've been meaning to get you a little something." Alara had smiled at him, intrigued. "A gift? For me?" Liam had simply nodded, a secretive smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You'll see." As they stepped into the bookshop, the bell above the door chimed softly, and the familiar warmth of the place wrapped around them like a blanket. The walls were lined with shelves of books, some old, some new, but all carrying with them the quiet weight of stories waiting to be discovered. The owner, Mr. Harrison, was behind the counter, his reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose, completely absorbed in a book. He looked up as they entered, his face lighting up in recognition. "Ah, Alara, Liam, so nice to see you both. Looking for something in particular today?" Mr. Harrison asked, his voice deep and full of warmth. Liam exchanged a quick glance with Alara before answering. "We're just browsing," he said, the playful tone still lingering in his voice. "But I may need your help with a gift for Alara. Something special." Mr. Harrison raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "A gift, you say? I'm sure I can find something fitting." He set his book aside, his hands already moving to the shelves. Alara watched them both, feeling the warmth of the exchange between them. It was moments like this that reminded her how much her world had shifted in such a short time. Liam, who had once seemed so distant, was now a part of the rhythm of her life. And the town of Brindlewood, once a place of mourning, had become a haven, a place where she could rediscover joy, love, and belonging. They spent a little while wandering through the aisles, the quiet hum of the shop a perfect backdrop for their conversation. Alara found herself drawn to the poetry section, her fingers tracing the spines of the books with a reverence that came from years of reading. She had always loved poetry, its ability to capture the unspoken truths of life, to convey the emotions too deep for words. And yet, she hadn't written any herself in a long time, not since the days of her grandmother's lullabies, the songs that had filled their home with warmth. As she reached for a worn copy of a collection of Emily Dickinson's poems, Liam appeared at her side, his presence comforting and familiar. "Found something you like?" he asked, his voice soft. Alara nodded, her fingers still on the cover of the book. "I love Dickinson's work," she said quietly. She had a way of capturing the quiet moments of life, the ones we often overlook. Liam smiled, his gaze drifting to the bookshelves around them. "I can see why you'd be drawn to her. You've always been someone who notices the small things, the quiet moments that others might miss. That's part of what I love about you." Alara's heart fluttered at his words. She had always thought of herself as somewhat of an observer, content to sit on the sidelines while the world moved around her. But with Liam, it was different. He saw her, really saw her, in a way that no one else had. Before she could respond, Liam motioned toward the counter, where Mr. Harrison was holding up a small, leather-bound journal. "I think this might be just the thing," Liam said, his eyes gleaming with a hint of pride. Alara took the journal from Mr. Harrison's hands, the soft leather warm beneath her fingers. It was simple, nothing flashy, but there was something about it that felt incredibly personal. The pages inside were blank, waiting to be filled with words, ideas, and dreams. Alara could almost feel the possibilities unfolding within its pages. "It's perfect," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Liam." Liam smiled, a look of contentment in his eyes. "I thought you might like it. I know how much writing means to you." They paid for the journal and left the shop, the cold air greeting them as they stepped back into the street. The snow had begun to fall more heavily now, the world outside shrouded in a quiet, dreamlike haze. Liam slipped his hand into Alara's, the touch familiar and comforting, like the warmth of the journal still nestled in her fingers. As they walked back toward her apartment, the weight of the world outside seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them now, walking together, hand in hand, toward an unknown future that suddenly didn't seem so frightening. The journal was a symbol of everything they had already shared and everything that was yet to come. It was a promise of new beginnings, of stories yet to be written, of songs yet to be sung. And as they reached her door, Alara paused for a moment, her heart swelling with emotion. This wasn't just a new chapter in her life. It was a new song, a song that had only just begun. And with Liam by her side, she knew the music would continue, a melody of hope, love, and endless possibility. Chapter 16. The Song That Changed Everything. The light of the new year had begun to shift in Brindlewood, casting a gentle glow over the town that seemed to promise something fresh, something full of possibility. The heavy snow had stopped for the time being, and the streets were lined with icy patches that sparkled like scattered diamonds under the winter sun. The quiet, slow rhythm of the town seemed to be settling into something almost meditative, and for Alara and Liam, it was the perfect backdrop for what had been brewing in their hearts for weeks now. The idea of a future together. It had been nearly a month since they had begun working on their song. The song that had started as an idea, a simple thought, but had slowly transformed into something more, something deeper. They would spend their afternoons writing in the cafe, sometimes working in complete silence, other times sharing snippets of lyrics or ideas, letting the music form naturally. And though neither of them had said it aloud, it was clear that the song was no longer just about their future. It had become a reflection of their growing love, of the quiet yet undeniable bond that had flourished between them. It wasn't just the music that had drawn them closer. It was the small, everyday moments that now held significance in ways they hadn't before. Their mornings were spent in quiet companionship, their conversations drifting from trivial matters to more meaningful exchanges about the past and the future. Alara had begun to share stories about her grandmother that she hadn't thought to tell anyone in years, and Liam, in turn, opened up about the pain that had led him to Brindlewood in the first place. There were moments of silence between them, too, but they were never uncomfortable. Instead, they had learned to appreciate those quiet stretches of time as much as the more energetic conversations. Their connection was not defined by words, but by the way they understood each other in the space between them. In the way their glances held unspoken promises, in the way their hands would instinctively reach for one another, as though they were two pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. One evening, as the sun began to dip behind the hills in the distance, casting the sky in shades of pink and lavender, Alara found herself standing at the window of her apartment, looking out over the town. The warmth of the fire from the living room filled the room, but it was the sight outside that had caught her attention. The snow was falling again, soft and steady, as though the world had decided to blanket itself in peace once more. She smiled softly to herself, her heart swelling with a quiet joy. This was what she had always wanted, this sense of belonging, of connection. She had spent so much of her life carrying grief, allowing it to shape her into someone she didn't fully recognize. But now, with Liam by her side, that grief no longer defined her. She had found something she hadn't realized she'd been searching for. A place to heal, to grow, and most importantly, to love. A soft knock at the door broke her reverie, and Alara turned, her heart skipping a beat. It was Liam. She had known he'd be here soon. He had become a regular part of her evenings, just as she had become a part of his. "Come in," she called, her voice light, her eyes already anticipating the familiar comfort of his presence. Liam stepped inside, his face flushed from the cold, his breath visible in the air. He smiled at her, a genuine, warm smile that never failed to make her heart flutter. "Evening," he said, his voice low and soothing. Alara walked toward him, her eyes soft with affection. "Evening," she echoed, her heart still beating in a quiet rhythm that matched the peaceful evening outside. Liam stepped closer, and for a moment, they simply stood there, the silence between them easy and natural. Then, as if on cue, Liam reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to Alara with a gentle smile. "I thought you might like something to add to your journal," he said, his voice carrying a hint of playfulness. Alara raised an eyebrow, intrigued, as she took the envelope from him. "What's this?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "Open it," Liam urged, his eyes sparkling. She carefully tore open the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the words written in Liam's familiar script. It was a poem, a simple, beautiful poem, one that seemed to perfectly capture everything she had been feeling. "In this quiet town, where snowflakes fall, we find our voices, we hear the call. Through moments of sorrow and joy we've known, together we're stronger, never alone. The future we build, the love we create, a song of our hearts, in perfect fate." Alara blinked, her heart full to the point of bursting. She looked up at Liam, her voice barely a whisper. "You wrote this for me?" Liam nodded, his eyes warm. "I've been thinking about the song we're writing, and, well, I thought this might be a good addition. It's how I feel about you, about us." Alara felt the tears welling up in her eyes, but she smiled, trying to hold them back. "It's perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's exactly what I needed." Liam stepped closer, gently wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "I meant every word." The room seemed to shrink as they stood there, so close that Alara could feel the warmth of Liam's presence in a way that went beyond the physical. She had never imagined she could feel so seen, so understood, and so loved. And yet, in this moment, with the snow falling outside and the fire crackling softly in the background, she knew that everything she had been searching for had already found her. "I'm so glad you're here," she whispered, her voice full of sincerity. Liam smiled, his hand coming to rest gently on her cheek. "I'm glad I'm here, too," he said, his voice filled with a tenderness that made Alara's heart swell. And in that moment, everything felt right. The song they had been writing together was more than just a collection of notes and words. It was the embodiment of their journey, of everything they had shared and everything they had yet to discover. It was the sound of hope, of love, and of the future that was unfolding before them. Later that evening, they sat together by the fire, Alara's journal open on her lap, the poem Liam had written carefully tucked inside. Their music played softly in the background, the melodies they had crafted together filling the space between them. It was a sound that seemed to match the rhythm of their hearts, steady, constant, and full of promise. As the flames danced and flickered in the hearth, Alara leaned her head against Liam's shoulder, closing her eyes and listening to the music that had become the soundtrack of their lives. And in that quiet, intimate moment, they both knew that the song they had started was far from over. It was only just beginning. Chapter 17. The final chorus of the heart. The days after Liam had gifted Alara his poem seemed to carry a certain weight, a quiet anticipation that settled over Brindlewood like the first breath of spring after a long winter. Though the snow still covered the town in its pristine layer of white, something in the air had shifted. There was a sense of beginning again, of growth, of a future that wasn't just a continuation of the past but a chance to redefine what came next. For Alara, those days were filled with small, deliberate choices that brought her closer to a version of herself she had once feared was lost. She had always been the quiet observer, the one who held her emotions close, afraid of what might happen if she let them slip free. But with Liam, she found herself breaking down those walls. The song they were creating together, the gentle rhythm of their collaboration, was a symbol of everything that was changing within her. It was no longer just a song about hope and love. It was about trust, vulnerability, and the power of being seen. Each morning, Alara woke with a renewed sense of purpose. She had become more aware of the little things. How the sunlight slanted through her window in the mornings, how the scent of coffee filled the room when she first stepped into the kitchen, how the sound of Liam's voice had begun to be the most comforting thing in her life. He had become a part of her daily routine, just as she had become a part of his. And though they hadn't spoken much about what they were to each other, it was clear in the way they moved through their lives, together but still so uniquely themselves. It was a Thursday afternoon when the next step in their song arrived. Unexpected, as always, and yet somehow inevitable. Alara was sitting in her favorite spot in the cafe. The journal Liam had gifted her open in front of her when she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Liam standing there, a grin on his face and a guitar case slung over his shoulder. "Hey there," he said, his voice light with the familiar warmth that had come to mean so much to her. "I thought I'd bring something new to the table." Alara raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's this?" she asked, motioning to the guitar case. Liam's grin widened as he set the case down on the floor beside her. "I've been working on a new arrangement for the song," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "I thought it might be fun to play it out loud for the first time." Alara's heart skipped a beat. Though they had worked on the lyrics and the melody in fragments, they had never played the song in its entirety, never heard it come to life in the way Liam's guitar could make it sound. She had imagined it, of course. How the chords would fit together, how the rhythm would carry the emotion of the lyrics, but hearing it for real was something else entirely. "You're sure?" she asked, her voice filled with a mix of anticipation and nerves. Liam nodded, his eyes sparkling with that same playful energy. "Positive. I want you to hear it, to see how it feels." With a careful motion, Liam unzipped the guitar case and pulled out the instrument, the familiar weight of it settling in his hands like a natural extension of himself. He took a seat across from Alara, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. Alara could feel the pulse of excitement in her chest as she waited for him to begin. It was one thing to imagine the song, to create it together through words and music. It was another to hear it come to life in the space between them. Liam took a deep breath and began to play, his fingers moving gracefully over the strings. The opening chords were soft, tentative, as though the song itself were still finding its footing. But as he played, the music grew, gaining confidence, gaining momentum, until it filled the room with the warm, familiar sound of a melody that had been born from both of them, from everything they had shared. It was the sound of hope, of new beginnings, of love. Alara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over her. It was like hearing her own heart being echoed in the sound of the guitar, the lyrics they had written together now taking on a life of their own. She could feel the rhythm of the song in her chest, the way the music seemed to align perfectly with the beat of her heart. It was as though the song had been waiting for this moment, for them to hear it in its full form, for them to witness the magic they had created together. When the song came to an end, Alara opened her eyes to find Liam looking at her with a mixture of expectation and vulnerability. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice quiet but full of hope. For a moment, Alara didn't speak. She simply took in the sound of the song, the weight of it, the beauty of it, and then, slowly, she smiled. "It's perfect," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's everything I hoped it would be." Liam's smile was soft, almost shy, as though he hadn't quite believed her until she said it aloud. He put the guitar down beside him, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm glad," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "I wanted it to be something we could both be proud of." Alara reached out, placing her hand over his. It was a simple gesture, but one that carried the weight of everything they had shared, everything they had yet to say. "It's more than that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's our story, our song." Liam nodded, his expression softening. "I'm glad I get to be part of it," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I'm glad it's with you." They sat there for a moment, their hands still entwined, the song they had created hanging in the air between them like a tangible thing. It was a moment that felt like the beginning of something, not just in their music, but in their lives. A moment that marked the shift from two people sharing a song to two people sharing a life. Alara felt a warmth spread through her, a quiet certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. She had spent so much of her life searching for meaning, for connection, for something that could make her feel whole again. And now, in this quiet cafe with the snow falling outside and Liam beside her, she realized that she had found it. Her journey, their journey, was far from over, but the song they had created was a reminder that it had already begun, and that, together, they could face whatever came next, no matter what the future held. Chapter 18. The Gift of an Unseen Composer. The days leading up to the end of the year seemed to stretch and blend together, each one marked by a quiet rhythm that Alara had come to cherish. The world outside Brindlewood continued its dance of snow and winter winds, but inside, the town's heart beat in a soft, steady pulse. Christmas decorations still hung from the lampposts along Main Street, their colors faded but not forgotten, and the scent of pine trees and cinnamon lingered in the air. It was as though time had paused just for a moment, allowing Alara and Liam to settle into a new chapter of their lives. The song they had created together was no longer just a piece of music. It had become a living, breathing part of them. It was their unspoken promise to one another, a reflection of their journey, their pasts, and everything they had discovered in the moments they had shared. It was a song that had blossomed out of their connection, as much a part of them as the laughter they had shared and the quiet conversations in the evenings. And yet, even though the song was a symbol of their growing bond, there was something deeper that remained unsaid between them, a thread that held them together but had yet to be fully acknowledged. Alara couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she knew that there was more between them, more that hadn't been voiced, more that hadn't yet found its way into their words. She could feel it in the way Liam's eyes would linger on hers when he thought she wasn't looking, in the way his hand would find hers when they walked through the town, in the way he would sit beside her for hours, not needing to say anything but still somehow saying everything. She had come to realize that their song was only a reflection of the relationship they were building, a relationship that wasn't just about the music or the moments they spent together, but about the trust they had begun to cultivate. It was about vulnerability and understanding, about the courage to face the unknown and the willingness to let go of the walls they had each built around their hearts. It was on one of these quiet afternoons, with the sun dipping low in the sky and the first stars beginning to appear, that Liam turned to her as they sat on the porch of her apartment. The air had grown crisp, the scent of wood smoke curling through the air from nearby chimneys, but there was a warmth between them that made the cold seem distant. They had spent the day revisiting the song, fine-tuning the lyrics and the melody, as though every note they played was an attempt to express the feelings they had yet to fully articulate. Liam set his guitar aside, his eyes thoughtful as he looked at her. "Alara," he began, his voice quieter than usual, as if he were testing the weight of the words he was about to say. Alara turned to him, her heart already skipping a beat. She had become so attuned to the way he spoke, to the cadence of his voice and the way his words seemed to linger in the air long after he had finished speaking. She had come to rely on that voice, on the way it made her feel safe, heard, and understood. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady but her pulse quickening in anticipation. Liam hesitated for a moment, his fingers tracing the edge of his guitar. "There's something I've been thinking about," he said slowly, his eyes searching hers for something, as if looking for the right moment, the right answer. "About us." Alara's breath caught in her throat, a mixture of curiosity and nervousness settling in her chest. It wasn't like Liam to be uncertain, to hesitate in the way he was now. His emotions had always been clear, even when they were unspoken. But this was different, and she knew it. This wasn't just about the song or the town or the way they had been able to connect so effortlessly. It was about something deeper, something that neither of them had fully explored yet. "What about us?" Alara asked, her voice soft, inviting. Liam leaned back, his gaze drifting toward the horizon as if he were weighing his thoughts carefully before speaking them aloud. I think we've both been dancing around something." His voice was low, almost hesitant, but there was a clarity in his words that Alara couldn't ignore. "We've spent all this time creating something together, and I can't help but feel like there's something more beneath the surface. Like we've built this connection, this song, this life. But there's still something we haven't said yet." Alara's heart quickened, her hands clasping together in her lap as she processed his words. He was right. There had been something unspoken between them, something that lingered in the spaces between their moments of laughter, their quiet afternoons, their shared songs. She had felt it, too. This pull, this tension, this quiet promise that seemed to exist without them acknowledging it directly. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, though she already had an inkling of where this was heading. Liam met her gaze then, his eyes steady but vulnerable. "I think we've both been afraid of what happens next," he said, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "We've built this beautiful thing, but it's not just about the song or the music or even the town. It's about us. It's about how I feel when I'm with you, how everything feels like it's falling into place when you're near me." Alara's breath caught, her chest tightening with emotion. She had known, in her heart, that there was more to their relationship than just the quiet companionship they had found. But hearing it from him, hearing him voice it aloud, made it feel real in a way she hadn't allowed herself to fully understand before. "I feel the same way," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of the truth that had been in her heart all along. "I've never felt like this with anyone before. Not in this way. Not with this depth." Liam reached for her hand then, his fingers closing around hers with a gentle firmness that sent a wave of warmth through her. "So what do we do now?" he asked, his voice soft, almost uncertain. "Do we take that next step? Do we see where this leads?" Alara looked at him, her heart filled with a quiet certainty that had taken root in her chest. The song they had written together, the music they had shared, was only the beginning. The next step wasn't about making a decision. It was about trusting each other, about stepping forward together into a future that wasn't fully mapped out but that felt right nonetheless. "I think we let the music lead us," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet confidence. "We've been creating something beautiful, and I don't think we need to have all the answers right now. We just need to keep writing our song." Liam smiled then, the tenderness in his eyes softening the uncertainty that had lingered between them. "I like that," he said, squeezing her hand. "I like that a lot." And as the night stretched on, with the stars beginning to sparkle above them and the warmth of their connection filling the space between them, Alara knew that this unspoken promise, this quiet certainty, was the beginning of something even more beautiful than the song they had created together. It was a future that awaited them, and it was theirs to write, note by note, hand in hand. Chapter 19. A Love Written in Music. The crisp air of January hung in Brindlewood, a subtle reminder that winter was not quite ready to release its hold on the town. But there was a sense of renewal in the way the town seemed to exhale, ready to embrace the shift from the holiday season to the quiet months of the new year. The Christmas lights were down now, and the decorations had been carefully stored away until next December, leaving the town looking like it was catching its breath, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. For Alara, this time of year had always felt like a kind of pause, the end of one cycle, the beginning of another. But this year, for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was not just waiting for something to happen, but was actively participating in the unfolding of her own life. And at the center of it all was Liam, the man who had somehow become her partner in every sense, musically, emotionally, and perhaps in ways they had yet to fully define. The song they had created together was more than just a collection of notes and lyrics. It had become the heartbeat of their connection, a living thing that grew with each passing day, with each moment they spent together. It was more than a gift they had given to each other. It was a promise, an embodiment of the love and trust they had slowly built. Alara had always been someone who observed life from the sidelines, hesitant to fully step into her own story. But with Liam, everything had changed. Their relationship had unfolded like the verses of a song, each note bringing them closer to the harmony they had both been searching for. It was early on a Saturday morning when Liam showed up at her door, a quiet smile on his face as he held a small, wrapped package in his hands. The snow had started to fall again, lightly dusting the ground in delicate layers, and the world outside seemed to hum with a peaceful stillness. Alara blinked in surprise as she opened the door, her hair still slightly messy from the night before. "What's this?" she asked, her voice still thick with sleep, though there was a spark of curiosity in her eyes. Liam's smile widened, and he stepped forward, handing her the package. "I thought you might like something," he said softly, his voice carrying a tenderness that warmed her from the inside. "A gift. For everything." She took the package from him, her fingers brushing against his as she did so. For a moment, she simply stood there, looking at the gift in her hands. She could feel the weight of it, but it wasn't the weight of the object itself. It was the weight of everything it represented: the love, the connection, the shared moments, the song. "Alara, open it," Liam said, his voice gentle but insistent, like he knew there was something important in the unwrapping. With a soft laugh, Alara peeled back the paper, her eyes narrowing slightly as she tried to guess what might be inside. When the last of the wrapping paper fell away, she found herself holding a small, leather-bound notebook. It was simple in its design, but it had a quiet elegance to it that immediately drew her in. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice soft with wonder as she traced the edges of the notebook. There was something about it that felt familiar, almost like it belonged to her, even though she had never seen it before. Liam's eyes were warm as he watched her. "I thought you might want something to write in, a place to capture all the thoughts, the ideas, the stories you want to share. The next chapter, so to speak." Alara's heart swelled with emotion as she looked up at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her fingers still caressing the cover of the notebook. "This is perfect. It's just the beginning," Liam said softly, his voice full of quiet conviction. "You've got so much inside you, Alara." I want you to know that you can share it with me whenever you're ready." Her breath caught in her throat as his words sank in. There it was again, the quiet, unwavering support that had come to mean everything to her. He wasn't just giving her a gift. He was giving her permission to dream, to create, to be who she was meant to be. "I don't know if I'll ever have the words for all of it," Alara confessed, her voice soft but steady. "I've spent so long keeping things inside, hiding away pieces of myself." "You don't have to hide anymore," Liam said, his voice like a steady anchor. "You never have to hide anything from me." Alara felt her heart skip a beat at his words, the weight of them settling in her chest like something precious. She had never fully allowed herself to be vulnerable, to trust someone with all of the pieces of herself. But with Liam, it felt different. It felt safe. "I don't think I'm ready to write all of it down yet," she said quietly, her fingers closing around the notebook. "But maybe one day I will." "I'll be here when you're ready," Liam replied, his smile warm and reassuring. "And I'll be here every step of the way, no matter what." The silence that followed was one of deep understanding, of a connection that had been nurtured over time and was now stronger than ever. The world outside was still quiet, the snow gently falling as if it, too, was holding its breath. And in that moment, everything felt perfect. Not because the world was perfect, but because Alara had finally found someone with whom she could face it all, someone who would be by her side, not just through the good moments but through everything that was yet to come. "Thank you," Alara said softly, her voice filled with gratitude as she looked up at him. "For everything." Liam didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step closer, closing the distance between them until he was standing right in front of her. He reached out, gently cupping her cheek in his hand, and for a moment, everything else seemed to disappear. It was just the two of them, the world outside fading into the background. "No need to thank me," he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. "I'm the one who's grateful. For you." And as they stood there, the quiet snow falling around them, Alara realized that she had found something she had never thought possible, a future that was hers to shape, a song that was hers to write, and a love that was hers to keep. Together, they would write the next verse, and the one after that, and the one after that. The beginning of the song had been uncertain, but now, with Liam by her side, the next chapter seemed clear. It wasn't about knowing exactly where the journey would lead. It was about embracing the uncertainty together, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it as one. The song had only just begun.